You know, when the P-38 Lightning first showed up, it must have looked like something from another planet. Seriously, with its twin booms, twin engines, and that central cockpit just packed with guns, there was simply nothing else like it in the sky. This wasn't just another fighter plane. It was a total reimagining of what a fighter could even be.
And that quote really just says it all. The engineers at Lockheed didn't just build an airplane, they assembled a monster. They were pushing the absolute limits of 1930s technology to create a machine that would, and I'm not exaggerating here, change the entire course of aviation history. Okay, let's really get into this.
So, you have to ask, who's the mind behind a monster like this? Well, it turns out to be one of the most legendary aeronautical engineers ever. And the wild part? He was just a young guy named Kelly Johnson.
I mean, just look at this career path. It's absolutely meteoric. At 23 years old, he's already telling senior management they need to completely redesign one of their planes. By 27, he's penning the P-38. And by 29, he's leading Skunk Works, which was basically the most advanced and secretive aeronautics lab on the entire planet. The guy, it seems, just had a habit of being right.
This was his motto. And it wasn't just some catchy phrase he threw around, it was the core doctrine at Skunk Works. This was the philosophy that let his teams just slice through all the corporate and military red tape to innovate at a speed nobody thought was possible. And that whole legacy, it really started right here with the P-38.
So what kicked this whole thing off? A request from the U.S. Army called Circular Proposal X608. And the demands were, well, they were insane for the time. They needed a high-altitude interceptor that could hit blistering speeds and climb to bomber altitude in just 6 minutes. The specs were so demanding that pretty much every other manufacturer in the country just looked at it and said, nope, not even going to try. They all thought it was impossible.
But Kelly Johnson knew something they didn't, or at least he was willing to bet on it. He knew no single American engine at the time could meet those demands. The only way forward was with 2 of them. But it's how you stick those 2 engines on a plane that changes everything. It was time to completely rethink what a fighter was supposed to look like.
And this is where you see that out-of-the-box genius from Johnson. Instead of just slapping engines on the wings of a normal plane, he designed a central pod just for the pilot and the weapons, and then he put the engines in their own separate booms. Now, this one decision had a massive, absolutely game-changing consequence. It left the nose of the plane completely free for an outrageous amount of firepower.
And by doing that, he solved one of the biggest headaches for nearly every other fighter pilot in World War II, convergence. See, most fighters had their guns in the wings, which meant you had to angle them inward so the bullets would meet at a specific point out in front of the plane. If your target was too close or too far away from that sweet spot, you'd miss. Well, the P-38 just erased that problem. All its guns fired straight ahead in a tight, concentrated stream of lead. It was like a laser beam of destruction, making it deadly effective at any range.
And what exactly did all that space get you? Just sheer, overwhelming firepower. All of it packed right into the nose. We're talking 4 50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon. That level of armament was, for the most part, completely unrivaled. The P-38 wasn't just a fighter, it was a flying gun platform, a capability that wouldn't really be outmatched until the very first German jet fighters showed up at the tail end of the war.
Okay, so now let's talk about the heart of this beast, the engines. Having 2 powerful Allison V710s was a great start, but the real engineering puzzle was making them perform way up in the thin, cold air of high altitude, exactly where the Army demanded this plane had to fight.
To make an engine work up there, you need what's called forced induction. Now, a supercharger is driven by a belt right off the engine. That gives you instant power, but it also sucks away some of that power just to run itself. A turbocharger, on the other hand, is smarter. It's powered by waste exhaust gas. It's way more efficient, but you get that infamous turbo lag while it spools up. The P-38, quite cleverly, used a combination of both.
Now, you have to understand, the standard Allison engine, like the one they put in the P-40 Warhawk, only had a pretty basic single-speed supercharger, and the problem was it was really only optimized for about 15,000 feet. You try to take it any higher than that, and its power just fell off a cliff. That made it a pretty lousy fighter at high altitudes.
The P-38's turbocharger system gave it this critical edge. It wasn't perfect, but it created a sweet spot. Right around 20,000 feet, the P-38 was actually faster than even the legendary Spitfire. So the key for any P-38 pilot was to lure the enemy into a fight right there, in that specific altitude band where they were king.
So when you're forcing all this compressed air into an engine, you create a ton of heat, and you have to get rid of it somehow.
But Johnson hated the idea of big, bulky air scoops that create drag. So he came up with another radical solution. He built the intercoolers right into the leading edge of the wings themselves. It was an incredibly elegant and clever way to keep the plane slippery and fast. But as we're about to find out, it came with a pretty serious hidden cost down the road.
So, you've got a plane with incredible range, blazing speed, and firepower like nothing else. But how did all that theory actually work out in the real world? Well, there is no better example, no greater proof of concept than one of the most audacious missions of the entire war, Operation Vengeance.
The mission was simple but incredibly dangerous. Intercept and shoot down the architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, Admiral Yamamoto. The catch? He was deep behind enemy lines. The mission would be a round trip of 1,600 kilometers. That's 1,000 miles, which was way, way beyond the reach of any other Allied fighter at the time. Only the P-38 could even attempt it.
Let's just break down this incredible feat for a second. The P-38s flew for hours, skimming just above the waves to stay off Japanese radar. They arrived at the intercept point with only 1 minute to spare. They then had to fight off his nimble Zero escorts, shoot down both of Yamamoto's bomber transports, and still have enough gas for the 600-kilometer trip back home. Think about that. Every single one of this plane's unique abilities was absolutely essential for success.
And if you need any more proof of just how tough this plane was, look no further. The P-38 was an all-metal beast, built tough with self-sealing fuel tanks. During that Yamamoto mission, one of the Lightnings reportedly took over 100 hits from Japanese Zeros and still made it all the way home. Its main opponent, the Zero, was mostly made of wood and fabric and could be brought down with just a few good shots. It was no contest in terms of toughness.
But the P-38 was not perfect, not by a long shot. Being so far ahead of its time meant it ran into problems that its designers literally could not have predicted. This was, in every sense, the price of progress.
Its biggest demon was a terrifying phenomenon called compressibility. Because the P-38's wings were so thick, in a high-speed dive, the air flowing over the top of him could actually break the sound barrier, even if the plane itself was only doing about 70% of that speed. And when that happened, all hell broke loose. The controls would lock up solid, and the plane would just tuck itself into an even steeper, completely uncontrollable dive.
So in the end, the P-38 was kind of haunted by two big unsolved problems. First, that super innovative cooling system in the wings, it just couldn't keep up as the engines got more and more powerful throughout the war. And second, that compressibility problem was never really fixed. They eventually added dive flaps to help pilots pull out of the dive, but it was really just a band-aid on a fundamental aerodynamic flaw.
And yet, despite all those flaws, the legacy of the P-38 is just immense. This was the plane that won Lockheed its first major military contract. It was the project that gave birth to Kelly Johnson's legendary Skunk Works. It quite literally launched the company from being a small, struggling firm into becoming the largest defense contractor in the world.
Which brings us to a really fascinating final question. The P-38 was a monster. It was a total game changer, but it was also deeply, deeply flawed. It was so far ahead of its time that it solved old problems while creating entirely new ones nobody had ever seen before. So, can a flawed design still be considered a masterpiece? I think the P-38 Lightning makes a pretty compelling case that the answer to that is a resounding yes.